Have you ever wondered if we are living in the last days? Biblical prophecies speak of grand battles that could change the course of history, and many times, they seem more like scenes from an apocalyptic movie than something real. Imagine a massive army attacking Israel, supernatural forces at work, and peace being broken in an absurd way. This sounds like science fiction, but the scriptures show us something much more real and profound. But what if I told you that all of this has already been prophesied and is being fulfilled right before our eyes? What will happen when good and evil clash in the final battles? The future of the world is being determined, and the events to come have a much greater purpose than we can imagine. God is in control of everything, and his plan for the end times is unfolding. How much time does humanity still have? What will your role be in all of this? Keep watching to understand how the prophecies of Gog and Magog reveal what is about to happen. You won't want to miss this. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do it now, because you will receive more videos about these prophetic events and how to prepare for what is to come. Turn on the notification bell to stay updated. Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39, complex and challenging prophecies. Have you ever heard of prophecies that seem so complex they leave you with a sense of mystery? Well, Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39 are exactly like that. Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39 talk about future events, but their interpretation is so difficult that many Bible scholars do not reach a consensus. Every verse seems to raise new questions. Who are these characters? What will really happen? It's no wonder these chapters are still so discussed today. They talk about a great battle, but will all of this happen the way we imagine? Have you ever stopped to think about this? What will it be like when these prophecies come true? The feeling is that we are living a science fiction movie, but with reality in the background, where everything written in the Bible could be more real than we imagine. Leave a like now if you also feel this unease and want to understand more about the future, according to the scriptures. The issue is that, despite the debates, Gog and Magog are names that appear in both Ezekiel and Revelation. But what do they mean for us? Gog is the leader of a great army, and Magog is the place from which he comes, possibly to the north of Israel. The thing is, no one knows exactly where this place is. So now, what does this mean for the world today? Gog and Magog, the deepened mystery. When we talk about Gog and Magog, we are not talking about something simple. Imagine that you are watching a play, but with a story so complex and full of meaning that you find yourself wondering, what is really happening? Who is Gog? Where does he come from? What does God want with Israel? These questions are exactly what make these chapters so intense. Gog comes from a place called Magog, located to the north of Israel. But the most curious thing is that Magog is not clearly identified in the Bible, which only adds to the mystery. But what is known is that Gog has a very large army and will attack Israel, which at the time is at peace. Imagine a scenario where a peaceful nation is caught off guard by a military force coming out of nowhere from a distant place. It seems like a war scenario, right? But what if I told you this battle will be more than a physical confrontation, but also a spiritual battle between good and evil? Imagine the impact of this in the world today. How would the world react? Theory about the timing of the battle. Before or during the tribulation. Here comes the real confusion. When will this happen? Will it be before the tribulation, a period of great suffering, or will it happen during the tribulation? Pause and think. How do you think the world would react if such a battle happened today? It's not an easy question, but it's exactly what the Bible challenges us to understand. Theory 1. Before the tribulation. The first theory suggests that this battle of Gog and Magog will happen before the tribulation. Imagine that the world is living in a time of peace, but soon war will break out. After this great battle, Israel will have to deal with the consequences, spending 7 years burning the weapons and 7 months burying the dead. But the most interesting thing about this is that these details show that the battle needs to happen at a time when Israel still has the capacity to carry out these cleanup processes. In other words, before a great global collapse. What if this battle happens before the tribulation? The world would be on the brink of an even greater chaos. Theory 2. During the tribulation. On the other hand, the second theory suggests that the battle would happen during the first part of the tribulation, when Israel still has a peace treaty with the Antichrist. Imagine that at first, everything seems fine. Israel is at peace, but the attack by Gog is a surprise. Suddenly, the entire peaceful scenario collapses, and the great destruction begins. How quickly can peace be broken? Prophetic details and the great confrontation. Now, imagine what happens when Gog actually attacks Israel. According to Ezekiel chapter 38, verses 18 to 23, God begins to move supernaturally. Gog's army, coming from the north, will be defeated in an impressive way. It will not be a common battle. There will be earthquakes, torrential rains, fire, and sulfur falling upon the enemies. All of this happens because God allows this invasion to show all the nations that He is the Lord. This means that, at the end of the battle, it will not just be a military victory for Israel, but a manifestation of divine power. How would you react if you lived in that time? It's not a science fiction movie. It's a prophecy that may be more real than we imagine. And what happens after that? God says it will take 7 years to burn the weapons and 7 months to bury the dead. Imagine the magnitude of that. This battle will be so great that it will take many years to clean up the mess. What does this mean for us today? Now, pause and think for a moment. What does all this mean for us today? Have you ever thought about what it would be like to live in a time when prophecies like these are being fulfilled? How would this affect our lives? These battles, these wars, are not just about a military confrontation, but about a spiritual struggle that has been fought over time. This is more than a physical war. Deep down, the fate of humanity and the victory of good over evil are at stake. And if you haven't given your like yet, do it now. This way you help spread more light on these truths that need to be shared with everyone. This battle will leave an eternal impact, because at the end of all this, God will be glorified. He is in control of everything. So, while Gog tries to attack Israel, God will use this battle to show the world His sovereignty and power. Are you ready to discover what comes next? We will go deeper into the consequences and how this will change the destiny of all. Nature of the battle, literal or symbolic. Now that we've explored the details of the prophecy in Ezekiel, a crucial question arises. Is the battle of Gog and Magog literal or symbolic? What does this really mean, and how does it affect our understanding of what is to come? Have you ever wondered if what is described there is a real event, with armies, destruction, and divine intervention? Or are we dealing with something deeper, representing a spiritual battle? What do you think? Is all this real, or is it just a symbol? These are the big questions that have generated debates among Bible scholars. For some, the battle will be a real event, happening literally, with Gog and his army coming from the north to attack Israel. For others, this battle is symbolic, representing something larger and more spiritual, a conflict between good and evil, with Gog and Magog representing forces that oppose God and His purposes for the world. Imagine for a moment, what if all of this were real? Imagine the impact of a battle of this magnitude happening in the not-so-distant future. If it were symbolic, it would just be a metaphor, right? But if it's real, it means the world will go through something truly devastating, with consequences beyond anything we can imagine. Now, stop and think. If this battle really happens, what will it mean for the future of humanity? Will it be a great physical confrontation, or will it be a spiritual battle fought in the hearts of men? These are the challenges the prophecy presents to us. Let's try to better understand what this really means for us today. In the premillennial view, held by many scholars, the battle will be literal. This means that the prophecy will be fulfilled exactly as it is written, with a great army coming from the north and attacking Israel. This event will be part of God's greater plan to restore Israel and show His sovereignty over all nations. Throughout the scriptures, we see many examples where God used conflicts and battles as instruments to manifest His greatness. Will the battle of Gog and Magog be just another one of these manifestations? Or will it be something that transforms the world in an even more surprising way? What does the Bible say about the impact of the battle? In Ezekiel chapter 38, verses 18 to 23, we see a very detailed description of what will happen when Gog and his army attack Israel. The Bible speaks of a great earthquake that will shake the land, leading to the destruction of many cities and the death of millions of people. Have you ever imagined such a catastrophic event? This wouldn't be symbolic, but an event that would change the course of history. The prophecy also speaks of a large number of casualties and how Israel will have to spend 7 years burning the enemy's weapons and 7 months burying the dead. Now, stop for a moment and reflect. How long do you think it would take to clean up after such a great war? 7 years. That seems almost beyond our imagination, but this is the magnitude of the event described. For many, this is a strong indication that the battle is indeed literal, with a global impact. Stop for a moment and think, if all this is real, what does it mean for humanity? How would the world react to an event of such grand proportions? This is a question we cannot overlook. And even more importantly, how would we, as individuals, prepare for such an event? Are we already prepared for what's to come? For those who defend a symbolic view, the Battle of Gog and Magog is not a physical confrontation, but a representation of a spiritual struggle. This interpretation sees Gog and Magog as symbols of evil forces that rise against good and against God's plan for the world. Perhaps this is more than just a simple physical battle. Perhaps it's a struggle between the forces of evil and the forces of good. In that case, the battle would be a metaphor for the conflict that happens inside each human being, between following God's will or surrendering to the temptations of evil. If it were just a symbol, what would this mean for us? The idea of an internal spiritual battle can be just as real as a physical war. This struggle happens within each of us every day. For example, every time we choose to do good instead of following our selfish impulses, we are, in a way, fighting our own battle against the forces of evil. Could the Battle of Gog and Magog be a representation of the struggle we all face? What will the final victory be in this spiritual confrontation? Imagine what it would be like to live in a world where the forces of good and evil are clashing openly. Can you visualize that? It would be like an apocalyptic scenario where everyone would need to take a stand. What would you do if you were in the middle of this battle? Now, think more deeply. What if you were living in this battle? What would you do? The Bible challenges us to understand that both the literal and symbolic struggles play an important role in human history. And above all, it's a battle that calls us to choose which side we are on. Are we willing to follow the path of peace, justice, and truth, or will we surrender to the temptation of the forces that oppose God? Now, before we continue, leave your comment below. I want to know what you think about all this. Is the Battle of Gog and Magog literal or symbolic? And what do you think it means for the future? Subscribe to the channel to not miss the next chapter of this prophetic journey, where we will explore more deeply the events that are about to come. Ezekiel's prophecy, the role of Gog. Let's continue our journey through these prophecies. And now, let's focus on a key character in the Battle of Gog and Magog, Gog. Who is he? And what role does he play in all this? Gog is the leader of a great army, and he has a very clear mission: to attack Israel. Now, imagine the impact of that. Israel, a small nation, constantly targeted by attacks and wars. But in this case, the battle is even more significant because it is at peace and unprepared. Pause and think for a moment. What would it be like if your country were at peace, not expecting any attack, and suddenly a huge enemy force attacks out of nowhere? Imagine the confusion and fear of seeing a massive army arriving, with no one knowing what was coming. It almost seems like a nightmare, doesn't it? But this is the reality Israel will face, according to Ezekiel's prophecy. Gog, the leader of the enemy army. Gog is described in the Bible as the prince of a distant land called Magog, and he leads a coalition of nations that come together to attack Israel. This coalition is made up of countries from the north, and the Bible does not clearly specify which nations are part of this alliance, but they are powerful. Gog, being the leader of this force, comes from a distant land, and his army is vast and threatening. He brings with him a great military force, made up of troops, war chariots, and heavy weapons. Now, what makes this battle even more significant? Israel, up until this moment, is living in peace. The country is calm, probably because it has made some kind of agreement with neighboring nations or even with the Antichrist, according to the prophecies of Daniel, chapter 9, verse 27. In this scenario, Israel is unprepared, living in safety, thinking it is protected. But what God does is exactly this. He attacks an unprepared people. Imagine the fear and surprise of a people who believe they are safe, but suddenly find themselves involved in a war without warning. It is not just a military battle. It is also a psychological blow to those who think they are at peace. Imagine being in a situation like this. You wake up on a peaceful day, not expecting any problems, and suddenly, chaos erupts around you. This feeling of complete unpreparedness would be terrifying. Now, put yourself in Israel's place. What would happen to you if you had to face such a huge enemy, and with no warning at all? The impact of surprise. Israel unprepared. When the Bible describes Israel as peaceful and unprepared, it refers to a time when the nation is finally enjoying a temporary peace. This is a critical point to understand what will happen. Israel has never been fully at peace for such a long time, and as much as peace is desired, it can also become a trap. This state of tranquility is what makes the nation vulnerable. Imagine that Israel is in a moment of growth and stability. Cities are expanding, trade is flourishing, families are growing, and everything seems to be going well. But at this very moment of stability, that is when the enemy decides to attack. It sounds like an action movie scenario, but the reality is that the Bible tells us this is exactly what will happen. A massive attack coming from Gog and his army. If Gog is ready to attack Israel, what will happen to the world? This question is what makes this prophecy even more frightening. The struggle will not just be a military battle, but a spiritual battle that will have worldwide repercussions. When Gog attacks, it will not just be Israel at stake, but the nations of the entire world will also be affected. God's intervention will be the key to changing the course of the battle. Now, one of the hardest questions is, how will Israel react? With such a large and well-prepared army, Israel's defense will not be easy. Many scholars believe that, at this point, Israel will not be able to defend itself, which makes divine intervention even more crucial. Ezekiel's prophecy not only describes the attack, but also speaks about the moment when God will intervene to defend Israel. How will God intervene in this battle? The Bible speaks of supernatural interventions. A great earthquake will occur, and it will not just be an ordinary tremor, but an earthquake so powerful that it will cause mass destruction and affect all of Gog's army. Additionally, there will be internal conflict among the enemies themselves, a kind of confusion and internal battle between Gog's forces. Will Gog's own soldiers turn against each other? That's exactly what the Bible says. God will use divine confusion to defeat Israel's enemies. Moreover, the prophecy speaks of hailstones, fire, and sulfur. These supernatural events are not just symbols, but indicate a direct intervention from God in the midst of the conflict. This is a clear reminder that God has absolute control over the events of the world. Even when the enemy seems to be winning, God can turn the tide in a supernatural way. Now, imagine the emotional impact on Israel seeing all of this happen. Will they understand that it is God who is fighting for them? It will be a moment of great spiritual renewal for Israel and for all those who believe in God's power. What does this prophecy mean for the world today? This prophecy has a deep meaning for us today. In a world full of insecurities and tensions, where we often feel helpless in the face of global problems, the story of Gog and Magog teaches us that no matter how great the threat, God has control over all things. He can act in a way that no human force can stop. Even in our moments of weakness or when peace seems to be in danger, God can act supernaturally to restore order. Now, before we continue with the next topics, don't forget to leave your like on this video if you find these revelations impactful. And also, if you want to understand more deeply about these events and how they affect your life, download our exclusive ebook in the pinned comment link. It will help you understand the times we are living in and what is coming ahead. Now, imagine what comes next. In the next topic, we will dive into the spiritual and physical consequences of this attack and how God will transform the destiny of Israel and the world with his intervention. Stay with us. Theories about the timing of the battle. Now that we've explored Gog's role and the impact of his invasion on Israel, we've reached a critical point. When will this battle happen? This detail makes complete sense if we think that the tribulation is a time of total chaos, where conditions would be extremely difficult for any type of reconstruction or prolonged cleaning activities. If the battle takes place before this period of global suffering, it would allow the people of Israel time to rebuild and clean up after the destruction without the interruption of major divine judgments. But there is another important point to consider. The attack of Gog and Magog could be an event that prepares the stage for the tribulation. The chaos caused by this battle could be the spark that ignites total war, leading to the rise of the Antichrist and the beginning of the tribulation. In other words, Gog and Magog would be the last great event before the global catastrophe that would start the period of divine judgments. How do you see this theory? Can you imagine such a devastating war that would take 7 years to be completely cleaned up? Leave your comment below and share what you think about this theory, and if it makes sense to you. Dive deeper into the implications of this time and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next explanations about the events that are coming. Theory 2. During the tribulation. Now, let's explore the second theory that suggests the battle of Gog and Magog will occur during the tribulation, more specifically, in the first part of the 7-year period of suffering. This theory is based on the idea that, at the beginning of the tribulation, Israel will be living in a temporary period of peace due to a covenant with the Antichrist, as described in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. What does this mean? Imagine that just before the tribulation begins, the world experiences a moment of false peace. In this scenario, Israel makes a peace covenant with the Antichrist, who promises security and protection in exchange for political alliances. During this time of peace, Israel will be unprepared for Gog's attack. Gog's army, coming from the north, will take advantage of this gap and attack Israel by surprise, catching the nation completely off guard. But what would be the purpose of this attack during the tribulation? According to this theory, the attack of Gog would serve to show the fragility of the temporary peace established by the Antichrist. Israel will be trusting in a false peace system, which, as we know from the scriptures, is just an illusion, and the war of Gog and Magog would come to reveal this illusion, challenging the idea that peace can be achieved without the true intervention of God. Imagine a scenario like this. Israel, after experiencing peace for a while, suddenly finds itself invaded by a much stronger enemy. This battle will not only be a military issue, but also a psychological shock, as many Israelis will have believed they were protected, only to discover that trusting in human covenants instead of God left them vulnerable. Now, consider the connection to the tribulation. If the battle occurs during the first part of the tribulation, it would suggest that the beginning of global suffering would happen after the fall of this false peace. The Antichrist, who until then seemed to bring stability, will now have lost control, and the nations will begin to see how the Antichrist system cannot save anyone. The attack of Gog and Magog could be the breaking point that accelerates the events of the tribulation. If you could live in a world like this, what would you do? In the face of a temporary peace that is, in fact, a false sense of security, will humanity realize the need for a true savior before it's too late? Leave your comment below and share your thoughts on how you see this theory and what it reveals about the nature of true peace and spiritual deception. Now, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming topics, where we will explore how these prophecies connect to the global events we are experiencing today. What is to come may be closer than we think. Conclusion. Which theory makes more sense? Both theories have their strengths and implications. If the battle occurs before the tribulation, the event may serve as the last sign of peace before the storm. If it occurs during the tribulation, it would serve as a warning that the false peace of the Antichrist is not true peace. Either way, these prophecies remind us that, no matter when or how, God will have absolute control over the events that will happen. Now, stay tuned, because soon we will explore what happens after this battle and how the prophecies unfold with divine interventions. Details of the battle in Ezekiel. Now that we understand the context and the timing of the battle of Gog and Magog, let's dive deeper into the details of the battle as described in Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39. This battle is unlike any other. It is described in such a grand and supernatural way that it is impossible not to be impressed. The description not only speaks of a physical war, but of a divine intervention that will change the course of history. And what will happen in this battle? Let's take a closer look. Gog attacks Israel with a great army coming from the north. The Bible begins by describing Gog's attack in an impressive way. Gog comes from the north, bringing with him a massive coalition of nations. Imagine a gigantic army with thousands and thousands of soldiers marching toward Israel. They don't come from just anywhere, but from a distant land to the north, something that makes this battle seem like a major global confrontation. It's like an invading army coming from afar, determined to destroy everything in its path. Now, imagine the impact of this army arriving. Israel, as we saw earlier, is at peace and unprepared. But when Gog's army arrives, it's like a storm that no one can stop. There is no defense sufficient to stop an attack of this magnitude. Gog brings not only soldiers, but also heavy war equipment, such as tanks and mounted knights. This is not a simple attack, but an attempt to completely destroy a nation. Stop and think about the impact of such an invasion. Can you imagine the fear that would overwhelm the population upon seeing such a large army approaching? Israel will have to fight for its survival, and what we see in Ezekiel is a description of a brutal war, but with something even bigger happening in the background. God's intervention, divine judgment, earthquakes, and destruction. Now, it's important to understand that this battle will not just be a physical fight between soldiers. The prophecy also speaks of divine judgment that will occur in the midst of this confrontation. God will not just be watching the fight. He will act directly, demonstrating his power in a supernatural way. When Gog and his army attack Israel, the Bible speaks of a great earthquake that will occur throughout the land of Israel. Imagine an earthquake so strong that it will affect not only cities and structures, but all of nature. The mountains will shake, the valleys will open, and the walls of cities will collapse. This will not be an ordinary earthquake, but a cosmic event, a sign that God has absolute control over everything that happens. In addition, the earthquake will not be the only sign that something supernatural is happening. The heavens will also be enraged, and the Bible speaks of a torrential rain that will fall upon the invading army. This rain will not be ordinary rain, but a storm sent by God, which will completely disorganize Gog and Magog's troops. How would you react if you were in the middle of a battle, and suddenly the sky filled with lightning and rain? This would be a clear sign that something bigger is happening. Nature is turning against the enemies, a manifestation of divine power. Infighting among the invading troops and manifestations of divine fury. And things don't stop there. In addition to the earthquake and torrential rain, there is something even more surprising. God will make Gog's own troops fight among themselves, causing confusion and disorder among the invaders. Gog thought his victory was guaranteed, but God puts an unexpected obstacle. The soldiers of Gog's army will start killing each other. Imagine the chaos this would bring to such a large invading army. The troops, who were ready to attack Israel, now turn on each other, not knowing what's going on. And as if that wasn't enough, God will also send fire and sulfur upon Gog's forces. God's fire will burn Israel's enemies. These won't just be natural elements, but a direct manifestation of divine fury. What seems like a simple military battle transforms into something much bigger, where God shows his absolute dominion over everything and everyone. Imagine the psychological impact of an army completely destroyed, not only by the fight, but by divine power. This is not just a war. It's a clear declaration that God is in control of the world and history. He will use these events to show all nations that he is the only sovereign, and no one can challenge him or escape his judgment. What does this mean for U.S. today? Divine judgment on Gog and his army is not something that happened only in the past, nor is it something too far removed from us. It reminds us that no matter how much evil seems to be winning, God will always have the final word. God's victory over the forces of evil is guaranteed. Even when everything seems lost, when evil seems to be winning, God will intervene in ways we could never imagine. The battle of Gog and Magog also teaches us that God is a God of justice, and he will use his divine strength to correct the injustices of the world. When evil rises against good, God will show his power in a way that will be impossible to ignore. Now, can you see the greatness of this moment? God's power being shown so clearly and directly. And what do you think about all this? Does this make you reflect on how you are positioning yourself before the challenges and battles of life? Leave your like if you think this divine intervention will be impressive. And don't forget to comment below what you think about this manifestation of power and how it changes our view of the spiritual battles we face. The Battle of Gog and Magog in Revelation 20. Now, let's take a big leap and look at Revelation, chapter 20, where we see another description of Gog and Magog, but with a completely different scenario. This battle happens after 1,000 years of Christ's reign on earth, meaning it's a battle that takes place at the end of the millennium, after the kingdom of Jesus Christ has been established and he is ruled in peace. But what makes this battle so significant? Let's explore. The battle happens at the end of the millennium, after the 1,000-year reign of Christ. The first thing we must understand is that in this version of Gog and Magog, the setting is completely different from what we saw in Ezekiel. Instead of a land marked by war and chaos, the millennium is a time of peace. During this period, Christ reigns over the earth, and things are tranquil. The nations live under God's justice, and Satan is bound. Everything seems to be in order, with evil restrained and humanity living under Christ's authority. Stop and think. What would it be like to live in a world where Christ rules directly? How would this change our daily lives? But, as we've seen in other parts of the scriptures, this peace will not be eternal. After the millennium, Satan will be released from his prison for a short period of time. And this is where the real battle begins. The peace of 1,000 years will be tested by a final rebellion, and the scenario will be completely different from what we saw in Ezekiel. There will no longer be an unprepared Israel, but a world entirely under Christ's authority, and Satan will try to launch a final attack against the people of God. Satan is released from his prison and deceives the nations for a final rebellion. After the millennium, Satan will be released from his prison, where he has been for 1,000 years, unable to influence the nations. But now he is set free, and his goal is clear. Deceive the nations one last time, gathering an army to rebel against God. He will once again seek to corrupt the hearts of the people, spreading lies and sowing hatred against Christ's divine government. How do you imagine the moment when Satan will be released? The idea that he returns to act after 1,000 years of peace is unsettling. After all, how will he be able to deceive people after so much time of peace under Christ's government? This shows the strength of Satan's deceptive mind, and how even a long period of peace can be broken by his schemes. What does this teach us about the dangers of deception and manipulation? This rebellion will not be small. Satan will gather the nations around the world, like Gog and Magog, to form a great army, ready to attack the people of God. Jerusalem, God's beloved city, will be the main target. The goal is clear: destroy God's people and try to usurp Christ's kingdom. But what Satan doesn't know is that this will be his last attempt, and he is already defeated before he even begins. The battle is against the people of God, Jerusalem being the target. The city of Jerusalem will be the center of this final battle. At the end of the millennium, it will be there that God's people will be gathered, and it is there that Satan and his followers will attack. Imagine the scene: a great army, made up of nations from all over the world, marching toward Jerusalem, the city chosen by God. This will be a final attack against everything sacred. But what makes this even more interesting is that, even with such a large and powerful army, the Bible tells us that the attack will be futile. This army, made up of deceived men and led by Satan, will be completely incapable of conquering Jerusalem or defeating God's people. The city of Jerusalem, although the target of the last rebellion, will be protected by God. How will it be to see such a large army reaching Jerusalem and realize that, in the end, it will be impossible to defeat it? God's victory will be guaranteed. No matter the size or power of the enemy, God has already declared his victory from the beginning. This is a huge lesson about God's sovereignty and how he always has the final word. Satan's defeat is immediate, with fire coming from heaven and consuming the enemy armies. Now, we come to the climax of this epic battle. Satan's army, after being gathered and marching to attack Jerusalem, will be destroyed instantly. How? God will make fire come down from heaven, and this fire will completely consume the enemy army. This victory will be so fast and devastating that there will be no resistance. Stop and imagine: fire coming down from heaven, consuming an entire army, destroying all that is evil in an instant. This will not be a long fight, but an act of divine justice, where God shows his authority and his ultimate victory over evil. Satan and his followers will have no chance, and this will mark the end of their rebellion forever. This final battle is proof that evil has no power to resist God. Satan, who thought he could deceive the nations, will be defeated in the blink of an eye, and his defeat will be so complete that he will be thrown into the lake of fire, where he will be punished forever. The battle of Gog and Magog, in this context, is more than a physical fight. It is a manifestation of God's final judgment, where evil is eradicated forever. What does this teach you us? It teaches us that, no matter how strong evil seems or how long it lasts, God will always have the final word. God's victory is unquestionable and final. Satan and his followers will be defeated, and evil will be extinguished forever. Subscribe to the channel if you want to continue exploring these incredible revelations about the end times. Don't miss the next chapter, where we will discuss the implications of the final judgment and what this means for all of us. Distinctions between the battles of Ezekiel and Revelation. Now that we understand the two versions of the battle of Gog and Magog, one described in Ezekiel and the other in Revelation, it's time to compare these battles and highlight the key differences that make them unique. Although both share the name Gog and Magog, they occur in very different contexts and have very distinct meanings. Let's explore these differences and how they fit into God's grand plan for the end times. The battle of Ezekiel happens before or during the tribulation, while the one in Revelation happens at the end of the millennium. The first major distinction between these two battles is the time in which they take place. In Ezekiel, the battle occurs before or during the tribulation, a period of great suffering that precedes the return of Christ. The people of Israel are being attacked by Gog and his coalition of nations, and God's intervention occurs supernaturally to restore order. In Revelation, the battle of Gog and Magog occurs at the end of the millennium, after the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth. This is a time of peace, where Christ reigns with justice, but Satan is released from his prison to deceive the nations in a final rebellion against God. The contrast is clear. The battle in Ezekiel occurs in a time of great tribulation and worldwide chaos, while the one in Revelation happens after 1,000 years of divine peace, when Satan tries to provoke the last revolt. Stop and think. What does this teach us about God's control over history? The battle in Ezekiel is a preparation for the judgment period that is to come, while the one in Revelation represents the final defeat of evil after 1,000 years of Christ's reign. These are two different moments, but both point to God's sovereignty. Gog and Magog in Ezekiel represent a northern coalition, while in Revelation they represent a global rebellion. The next major difference between these two battles is the nature of the forces involved. In Ezekiel, Gog is the leader of a coalition of nations coming from the north of Israel to attack it. These nations are united by a common goal: to destroy Israel. The battle, although on a large scale, is geographically limited, with a clear focus on the region of Israel and its borders. On the other hand, in Revelation, Gog and Magog represent a global rebellion. We are no longer dealing with a coalition limited to a specific region, but with nations from all over the world uniting under Satan's leadership to attack God's people in Jerusalem. This universal rebellion highlights the magnitude of evil in this final confrontation, and Satan's attempt to gather all the forces of evil to destroy God's work. Could this global rebellion be Satan's last attempt to show that he still has power? This is an attempt to unite evil against God, but as we will see, this battle will be overwhelmingly and quickly defeated. Imagine the impact of a global rebellion. It will not just be an invasion from the north, as in Ezekiel, but a fight involving nations from all corners of the world, with supernatural forces behind it. Satan's power will be so great that he will convince entire nations to unite against God, but his defeat will be even more complete. Satan is explicitly responsible for the battle in Revelation, unlike in Ezekiel, where God allows God's invasion to fulfill his plans. The last major difference between the two battles is who is responsible for initiating them. In Ezekiel, God allows Gog and his coalition to invade Israel. He does this with a clear purpose: to fulfill his plans. God uses this invasion to show his power over the nations and to restore Israel. In other words, God allows evil to rise for a time, but he has a sovereign plan behind it, which will culminate in the defeat of Israel's enemies. In Revelation, Satan is explicitly responsible for this battle. After being released from his prison, he deceives the nations to unite against God and the people of Jerusalem. This marks Satan's last attempt to take control of the earth and defeat God's divine plan. He will be the leader of a desperate rebellion, trying to deceive and corrupt the nations to turn against God. This will be a battle purely motivated by evil, and its end will be equally definitive: the total defeat of Satan. Stop and think. What does this teach us about God's control over the final events? In Ezekiel, God uses evil as part of his redemptive plan. But in Revelation, Satan acts on his own, trying to deceive the nations to oppose God. In the end, God triumphs in an even more glorious way because he is in control of everything, even the evil attempts to rebel. Now, I want to know your opinion. What do you think about these differences between the battles of Ezekiel and Revelation? Leave your comment below and share what you have learned from these distinctions. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue following this series on the final events and the fulfillment of biblical prophecies. Download the ebook from the pinned comment link to deepen your knowledge of these revelations and how they apply to today's world. Now that we understand the distinctions between the battles, let's dive into the meaning of these differences for God's plan for the end times and how he guarantees the final victory. God's sovereignty over future events. Now that we have explored the battles of Gog and Magog, God's final victory, and the role of evil in the end times, let's reflect on something fundamental: God's sovereignty over all future events. When we think about everything that is to come, the wars, chaos, and tribulations described in the scriptures, we need to remember that, above all, God is sovereign over all things. This means that he is in control of everything. The nations, the governments, and even the most dramatic events in human history. He knows what is going to happen and has a perfect plan for everyone's future. God is sovereign over all things, including nations, governments, and historical events. Stop and think for a moment. What does it mean to live in a world full of chaos, uncertainties, and conflicts? It seems like control is in the hands of men and governments, but the Bible teaches us something different. God is sovereign, meaning he has absolute authority over all things. From the rise and fall of nations to the global events that affect us, God has total control. Nothing happens without his permission. The leaders of nations, with their plans and decisions, are under God's authority, who uses all things to fulfill his divine purposes. Imagine you are watching events unfold around the world. Governments are making decisions that affect millions of people, conflicts arise, and chaos seems to spread. In moments like these, it may seem like we are lost, without direction or hope. But when we look through the lens of God's sovereignty, we realize that he is orchestrating events to fulfill his will and plans for humanity. No government leader or nation is beyond his control. His authority guarantees peace and justice, even in times of chaos. Have you ever felt insecure or anxious about the future? It's easy to worry, especially when we see what is happening around us: wars, economic crises, natural disasters. But God's sovereignty gives us great hope. Even in the midst of chaos, his authority guarantees peace and justice. When everything seems to be falling apart, we can be sure that God is still in control. He has the ability to bring peace, even in times of suffering. In the Bible, we see examples of how God, in his sovereignty, brought justice and restored peace. Think about how he intervened in crucial moments of history to protect his people and ensure that his plans were fulfilled. The same applies to the events still to come. Despite all the chaos that may arise, we know that God will bring justice at the end of it all. He will use suffering and difficulties to refine the hearts of his people and prepare them for eternal victory. How does this make you feel? Knowing that, no matter how turbulent the world is, God is in control of every event. This gives us a sense of security, because even when evil seems to dominate, God has the power to restore peace and make everything new. God's sovereignty offers comfort, because he controls all aspects of life and everyone's future. God's sovereignty is not just about global events. It also applies to our personal lives. Did you know that God has control over every aspect of your life? From your birth to the challenges you face every day, God has a plan for you. He controls the past, the present, and the future. This means that even when you don't understand the circumstances around you, you can trust that God is working in your life in ways that you may not see, but that are for your good. How would this change your perception of your problem? If you knew that God controls even the smallest details of your life, how would that give you peace? God's sovereignty offers comfort in times of pain, because we know that he is with us every step of the way, guiding and sustaining us. No matter what you are facing today, God has a perfect plan for your life. He is sovereign over your struggles and victories. Now, think about this. If God is in control of everything, then there's no reason to fear the future. He already knows what is to come, and you can trust him to guide you in every decision, every challenge. This gives you the confidence to move forward, knowing that, in the end, the victory is his. If you've been touched by this message and understand more about God's sovereignty, leave your like on this video, share it with your friends so more people can be encouraged, and subscribe to the channel to not miss any of the revelations we are sharing here. If you want to understand more deeply what the scriptures say about the end times and how to live in confidence, download the ebook from the pinned comment link. And finally, I want to leave you with a blessing. May God bless you, and may you feel his peace and sovereignty in every area of your life. May he guide you, protect you, and give you strength to face any challenge with faith and confidence in his perfect plan. See you next time